A millionaire disguised himself as a waiter in his own hotel. No one knew who he really was. But when disaster struck during the grand gala, his secret would change everything. As the night unfolded, a crisis threatened to ruin their hard work. But the real shock came when he revealed who he truly was. Could his actions save the hotel and the people who worked there? Tune in to find out how a single night of deception led to a life-changing transformation. Don't miss the shocking twist. Watch till the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. Ethan Navarro stood by the towering glass windows of his penthouse, watching the city of Atlanta hum with life below. His reflection stared back at him, a 38-year-old man with success carved into every line of his tailored suit. Yet as he looked closer, he saw the weight of his father's expectations etched into his face. The city lights blurred slightly as he blinked, his mind returning to the moment that had led him here. The Imperial Lux, his flagship hotel, once the crown jewel of his family's business, was in trouble. Guest satisfaction had plummeted, employee turnover had skyrocketed, and the spark that once defined the hotel seemed extinguished. He had pored over reports, charts, and endless meetings with managers, but the answers eluded him. The corporate view of spreadsheets and metrics didn't show the heart of the problem. His fingers clenched the edge of the windowsill as he whispered to himself, "If you want to fix something, Ethan, you have to see it for what it is." The voice of his late father echoed in his memory, a voice that often spoke of humility and the strength found in understanding those who worked alongside you. That was how the idea had taken root. It was bold, unconventional, and, if he was honest with himself, downright risky. But the more he thought about it, the more convinced he became. If he couldn't understand the daily struggles of his staff, he couldn't save his legacy. Ethan turned from the window, his jaw set with determination. The transformation was subtle yet startling. His signature black hair had been dyed a plain chestnut brown, his striking hazel eyes masked by contact lenses that dulled their color, and a modest pair of glasses perched on his nose. A neatly trimmed mustache completed the look, rendering him almost unrecognizable. The crisp uniform of a waiter hung neatly on the back of a chair, simple black slacks, a white shirt, and a vest embroidered with the Imperial Lux insignia. It was a stark departure from his usual wardrobe, but it would serve its purpose. His plan was simple. He would join the hotel staff under the alias Chris Delgado, working as an entry-level waiter. For the next several weeks, he would immerse himself in the day-to-day grind of the employees, observing their struggles, interactions, and the roots of the hotel's decline. It was an idea born out of both desperation and the memory of his father's insistence on leading with empathy. "Here goes nothing," Ethan murmured, his voice steadier than he felt. The next morning, Ethan walked into the bustling service entrance of the Imperial Lux for the first time, his heart pounding harder than it had during any boardroom presentation. The sleek luxury of the hotel's public areas gave way to utilitarian hallways lined with fluorescent lights and scuffed walls. He approached the personnel office where a tired-looking woman with salt and pepper hair and a name tag reading Maria glanced up from her desk. "You must be the new guy," she said, her tone brisk. "Yes, ma'am. Chris Delgado," Ethan replied, extending his hand. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, deliberately stripped of the confidence that usually laced his words. Maria handed him an access badge and a schedule. "You'll be reporting to Mr. Harrison. He's not the warmest, but follow his rules and you'll be fine." Ethan nodded, muttering a polite thank you before making his way toward the staff quarters. As he passed through the halls, he saw faces etched with exhaustion, some exchanging quick smiles, others hurrying to their stations without so much as a glance. Dominic Harrison, the hotel's general manager, was waiting at the service elevator, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "You're the new hire," he said, his voice clipped. "Chris, is it?" "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, keeping his tone neutral. Dominic didn't bother with pleasantries. "Listen carefully. Your job is to follow instructions and stay out of the way. Guests come first, always. If I find you slacking, you'll regret it, understood?" "Yes, sir." Dominic's piercing gaze lingered for a moment before he walked off, leaving Ethan with an unexpected surge of irritation. It was one thing to create authority. it was another to wield it as a weapon. Ethan's first task was to shadow a senior waiter, an older man named Peter McCall. Peter's demeanor was calm but curt, his instructions concise as they navigated the intricacies of breakfast service. Keep your posture straight, smile but not too much. Guests want attentive, not overbearing. Ethan struggled to keep pace as Peter moved seamlessly through the room, balancing trays with the precision of a seasoned professional. By the time breakfast service ended, Ethan's back ached and his feet screamed in protest. During the break, Ethan found himself sitting at a table in the staff cafeteria, feeling out of place. He watched as employees exchanged quiet conversations, their faces weary but animated. Across from him, a young woman with bright, intelligent eyes plopped down with a tray of food. "I'm Jasmine," she said, offering a small smile. "First day, huh?" "Is it that obvious?" Ethan asked, returning the smile. "Don't worry, we've all been there," she said, her tone light but laced with a trace of exhaustion. Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp sound of Dominic's voice echoing down the hallway. "Break's over in 2 minutes. Move it." Ethan watched as the room sprang to life, trays discarded and conversations cut short. Jasmine offered him an apologetic shrug before disappearing into the crowd. As he resumed his shift, Ethan couldn't shake the sense that something was deeply wrong beneath the surface of the hotel. The polished image of the Imperial Luxe, gleaming chandeliers and marble floors, hid a reality of overworked staff, strained resources, and a management culture that seemed indifferent to the people who made the hotel function. By the end of the day, Ethan returned to his modest room in the staff quarters, his body aching and his mind racing. The stark contrast between the world he'd left behind and the one he now inhabited was more jarring than he'd anticipated. Lying on the narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, Ethan felt a surge of determination. If he wanted to fix the Imperial Luxe, he needed to understand it. Not just the numbers, but the people. And so he closed his eyes, preparing for another day of discovery, challenges, and the truths that awaited him in the hidden corners of his empire. Ethan stood outside the staff locker room early the next morning, adjusting his vest and tugging at the cuffs of his waiter uniform. The crisp fabric felt alien compared to the tailored suits he normally wore. He took a deep breath and pushed open the door, stepping into the buzzing atmosphere of the Imperial Luxe's morning rush. Inside, the scene was controlled chaos. Employees hurried to and fro, carrying trays, steaming coffee pots, and freshly pressed linens. The hum of chatter, clattering dishes, and occasional sharp commands from supervisors filled the air. Ethan quickly realized there was little time for pleasantries in this world. Every second mattered. He spotted Peter McCall, the senior waiter who had guided him the day before, meticulously folding napkins at the service station. Peter glanced up, his eyes sharp as ever. "Delgado," he called out, waving Ethan over. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, slipping into the role he was still getting used to. "Breakfast service isn't a game," Peter said without preamble. "It's precision, speed, and composure. Think you can keep up today?" "I'll do my best." Peter raised an eyebrow but didn't comment further. Instead, he handed Ethan a tray of freshly brewed coffee and pointed toward the dining room. "Table 6, VIP guests. Don't spill, don't hesitate, and for heaven's sake, don't interrupt their conversation." Ethan maneuvered carefully into the bustling dining area, acutely aware of how much attention was directed at every staff member. The opulence of the room contrasted starkly with the service corridors he'd passed through moments before. Crystal chandeliers glittered above tables draped in pristine white linens. Guests sipped mimosas and read newspapers, their conversations a low murmur. Approaching table 6, Ethan spotted the VIPs, two sharply dressed executives deep in discussion. He steadied his hand as he poured their coffee, keeping his eyes lowered. "Your coffee, sirs," he said softly. One of the men glanced up briefly, gave a curt nod, and returned to his conversation. Ethan felt a small wave of relief and backed away smoothly, just as Peter had instructed. The rest of the breakfast service was a whirlwind. Ethan followed Peter's lead, picking up plates, clearing tables, and responding to guest requests with as much poise as he could muster. By mid-morning, he felt a dull ache settling into his feet and lower back. As he carried a tray of dirty dishes back to the kitchen, Ethan nearly collided with a young woman juggling a stack of plates. "Whoa, sorry," she exclaimed, steadying herself with practiced ease. "No harm done," Ethan said quickly, recognizing her as Jasmine Reed. Jasmine gave him a quick once-over, her ponytail swishing as she adjusted her load. "Chris, right? You're still in one piece, that's a good start." "Barely," Ethan admitted, offering a sheepish grin. She laughed, a warm sound that momentarily lightened the air. "It gets easier, or maybe you just get used to the chaos." Before Ethan could reply, a sharp voice cut through the room. "Reed, Delgado, less chatting, more working." Ethan turned to see Dominic Harrison standing near the kitchen doors, his arms crossed and his expression as cold as the industrial refrigerator behind him. Dominic's presence had a way of draining the energy from a room. "Yes, sir," Jasmine replied, her smile fading as she hurried off. Dominic's piercing gaze landed on Ethan. "You're on thin ice already, Delgado. Focus on your job." "Yes, sir," Ethan said evenly, though his pulse quickened. Dominic lingered a moment longer before stalking off, barking orders at other employees. Ethan's hands clenched involuntarily around the tray he carried. There was something about Dominic's demeanor, calculated, authoritative, and demeaning, that made Ethan's skin crawl. During the midday lull, Ethan found a quiet corner of the staff cafeteria and sank into a chair, exhaustion weighing on him. Jasmine slid into the seat across from him a few moments later, setting down her tray with a sigh. "Tough morning?" she asked, unwrapping a sandwich. Ethan nodded. "I didn't realize how much went into this job. It's a lot." Jasmine chuckled softly. "Yeah, and you haven't even seen the worst of it. Wait until dinner service. That's when the real chaos begins." He smiled faintly, appreciating her candidness. "How long have you been working here?" 2 years, she said, her tone neutral. "It's not bad. Pays the bills, keeps the lights on at home. But some days it feels like we're all just trying to survive." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Jasmine hesitated, glancing around the room as if to make sure no one was listening. "Let's just say management doesn't always make it easy. We're short-staffed, overworked, and underpaid. But hey, at least the guests are happy, right?" Her words lingered with Ethan as he returned to his duties. The day wore on, and Ethan began to notice more of the subtle cracks in the hotel's operations. The cleaning staff rushed to meet impossible deadlines. The kitchen workers juggled multiple orders with minimal resources, and the reception desk fielded complaints with forced smiles. By late afternoon, Ethan was tasked with assisting a high-maintenance guest in one of the private dining rooms. The man, impeccably dressed and quick-tempered, berated Ethan over the slightest imperfections. "This water is lukewarm," the guest snapped, shoving the glass toward him. Ethan bit back a retort and replaced the glass with a fresh one, maintaining his composure. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of Dominic observing the exchange from the doorway. Their eyes met briefly, and Dominic smirked before walking away. By the time Ethan clocked out, the weight of the day's experiences pressed heavily on him. He retreated to his small room in the staff quarters, collapsing onto the bed. The sterile walls and minimal furnishings felt like a far cry from the luxury suites upstairs. Staring at the ceiling, Ethan replayed the day in his mind. The frenzied pace, the strained faces of his co-workers, and the oppressive presence of Dominic. There was no denying it now. Something was deeply broken within the Imperial Lux. As exhaustion finally pulled him into sleep, one thought crystallized in Ethan's mind. If this was what his staff endured daily, he couldn't afford to fail them. Ethan's alarm buzzed harshly at 5 in the morning, dragging him from a restless sleep. His muscles ached from the relentless pace of the previous day, but he swung his legs over the side of the narrow bed and prepared for another shift. Each step felt heavier, but his determination to uncover the truth about the Imperial Lux grew stronger. The staff locker room was quieter this early, the fluorescent lights casting a cold glow on the rows of lockers. Ethan changed quickly, slipping into his uniform and blending into the crowd of employees beginning their day. He noticed Jasmine near the coffee machine, her face lined with exhaustion. "Morning," he greeted, offering a faint smile. She glanced at him and nodded. "Morning, ready for another round?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Jasmine smirked, but her expression quickly faded when Dominic strode into the room, his presence casting a palpable shadow. "Let's get moving, people," he barked, his sharp voice cutting through the room. The morning rush was as hectic as ever, with Ethan and his colleagues darting between tables, refilling drinks and clearing plates. As Ethan maneuvered through the dining room, he noticed a commotion at the hostess stand. A middle-aged woman in a sharp suit was gesturing angrily, her voice rising with each word. "I booked this table a week ago. This is unacceptable," she fumed. The hostess, a young woman with wide eyes and trembling hands, stammered, "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Let me see what I can do." Ethan paused, watching as Dominic approached the scene with his practiced smile. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked smoothly. "This girl messed up my reservation," the woman snapped. "I demand to speak to the manager." Dominic's expression hardened for a split second before he turned his attention to the hostess. "How could you let this happen?" he hissed. I don't know, sir. I checked the log. Clearly you didn't check it well enough." Dominic interrupted, his tone icy. "This is unacceptable. Fix it now, or I'll find someone who can." The hostess nodded frantically and disappeared into the back, leaving the woman appeased but the air heavy with tension. Ethan clenched his fists as he watched Dominic return to the dining room, his demeanor unchanged. Later that day, Ethan found himself stationed in the employee cafeteria during his break. He sat beside Jasmine, who was picking at her sandwich with little enthusiasm. "Does it always feel like this?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Jasmine sighed, setting her sandwich down. "Like what?" "Like you're walking on eggshells. One mistake and—" he gestured vaguely, letting the thought hang in the air. Jasmine's expression darkened. "Yeah, it does. You can't afford to mess up here. Not with someone like Dominic watching." "What's his deal?" Ethan pressed, his curiosity growing. Jasmine hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "He's been here about 2 years. Came in with a lot of big talk about efficiency and cutting costs. But all he's done is push people harder, cut hours, and ignore problems that don't affect the guests directly." Ethan frowned. "Like what?" Jasmine's gaze dropped to her hands. "Like the pool equipment. It's old, dangerously old. I've told him about it more than once, but he doesn't care. Says there's no budget for replacements." "That sounds risky," Ethan said, alarmed. "It is," she replied. "But as long as the guests don't complain, nothing changes." Their conversation was interrupted by a staff member calling out for Jasmine to return to her station. She gave Ethan a small, apologetic smile before hurrying off, leaving him alone with his thoughts. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan began to notice more of the subtle injustices within the hotel. He saw how employees like Peter, with decades of experience, were treated no better than fresh hires. He saw the kitchen staff scrambling to prepare meals with limited supplies, and he heard murmurs of frustration from the housekeeping team about unrealistic cleaning schedules. But the tipping point came during dinner service. Ethan was delivering drinks to a group of businessmen in one of the private dining rooms when he overheard their conversation. "This place used to be something special," one of them said, swirling his glass of whiskey. "Now it's just mediocre." "Yeah," another agreed. "Service is slow, the rooms aren't as clean, and don't even get me started on the food. What happened here?" Ethan felt a pang of shame as he cleared their empty glasses. It wasn't just the employees who were suffering. The guests were noticing the cracks too. That night, as he prepared to leave, Ethan passed the pool area and noticed a small group of employees gathered near the equipment room. Jasmine was among them, her voice raised in frustration. "We can't keep using this stuff," she said. "Someone's going to get hurt." Peter, standing beside her, sighed heavily. "I hear you, Jasmine, but what can we do? Dominic's not going to listen." "We have to do something," she insisted. "We can't just wait for an accident to happen." Ethan stepped closer, his heart pounding. "What's going on?" Jasmine turned to him, her eyes flashing with determination. "We're trying to figure out how to deal with this," she said, gesturing toward the worn pool equipment. "It's a safety hazard." Ethan looked at the rusted lifeguard stand, the frayed pool nets, and the cracked tiles around the edge of the water. It was a lawsuit waiting to happen. "Have you tried going over Dominic's head?" he asked. Peter shook his head. "That's career suicide. If he finds out, we're done." Ethan's mind raced as he considered their options. He couldn't reveal his true identity, not yet, but he couldn't stand by and do nothing either. "Maybe there's another way," he said slowly. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like documenting everything," Ethan suggested. "Take pictures, write down incidents, and keep a record. If we can build a case, it'll be harder for Dominic to ignore." Jasmine and Peter exchanged a glance before nodding. "It's worth a shot," Jasmine said. As they dispersed, Ethan lingered by the pool, staring at his reflection in the dark water. The weight of the day's revelations pressed heavily on him. The Imperial Lux was more than just a struggling business. It was a microcosm of systemic neglect and exploitation. Ethan clenched his fists, a new resolve taking hold. If he wanted to fix this, he couldn't just observe from the sidelines. He needed to act. The next morning, Ethan walked into the staff locker room with an idea brewing in his mind. His conversation with Jasmine and Peter the previous night had planted a seed, a way to quietly fight back against the neglect and indifference plaguing the Imperial Lux. If no one in management would listen to the staff, perhaps they could create their own solutions. But first, he needed allies. Jasmine was already at her station, setting up silverware with methodical precision. Her expression was tight, but there was a flicker of determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Ethan approached her cautiously. "Morning," he said, keeping his voice low. "Morning," she replied, barely glancing up. Ethan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about what we talked about last night, about documenting everything. I think we should take it a step further." Jasmine straightened, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "What if we started making small changes ourselves? Nothing big, just enough to show that we care more about this place than the people running it do." Jasmine's eyes narrowed as she considered his words. "You mean, like fixing things ourselves?" "Exactly," Ethan said. "We know the problems better than anyone else. Why wait for someone else to step in when we can start fixing what we can?" Jasmine let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "You're ambitious, Delgado, but Dominic's not going to make this easy." "He doesn't have to know," Ethan said, a glint of determination in his eyes. Jasmine's lips quirked into a small, reluctant smile. "All right, what's the plan?" The first act of rebellion was subtle, almost imperceptible. During his break, Ethan slipped into the pool equipment room with Jasmine and Peter, who had agreed to help. Armed with a toolbox Peter had borrowed from the maintenance department, they replaced the frayed ropes on the lifeguard stand and patched up the worst of the cracked tiles around the pool's edge. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow as they stepped back to admire their work. "Think anyone will notice?" he asked. "Hopefully not," Peter said, his tone grim. "At least not the wrong people." Over the next few days, their small acts of rebellion continued. Jasmine reorganized the cleaning supply closet to make it easier for housekeeping staff to access what they needed. Peter, with his years of experience, showed Ethan how to repair a faulty air conditioning vent in one of the guest rooms. Ethan felt a growing sense of camaraderie with his colleagues. It was a stark contrast to the isolation he'd felt as the hotel's CEO, where decisions were made in boardrooms far removed from the day-to-day struggles of the staff. But not everyone was on board with their efforts. During a late-night shift, Ethan found himself cornered by Dominic in the service hallway. The general manager's sharp eyes bore into him, his lips curling into a sneer. "You've been awfully busy for a new hire," Dominic said, his tone laced with suspicion. Ethan kept his expression neutral, his heart pounding. "Just trying to do my job, sir." Dominic stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Don't think I haven't noticed you poking around where you don't belong. If you think you can outsmart me, you're sorely mistaken." Ethan met his gaze, refusing to back down. "I'm just here to help, sir, that's all." Dominic's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. He turned sharply on his heel and stalked away, leaving Ethan with a sinking feeling in his gut. The encounter only strengthened his resolve. If Dominic wanted to maintain his iron grip on the hotel, Ethan was determined to prove that the staff could rise above his oppressive rule. One evening, as Ethan and Jasmine prepared to close the dining room, a young waiter named Lucas approached them hesitantly. Lucas was barely out of his teens, his nervous energy palpable as he wrung his hands. "I heard you've been fixing things," Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan exchanged a glance with Jasmine before nodding. "What about it?" "I want to help," Lucas said quickly. "I'm sick of watching people get chewed out for stuff that isn't their fault. If there's something I can do—" Jasmine's smile was small but genuine. "The more the merrier," she said. Lucas beamed and Ethan felt a surge of hope. Their quiet rebellion was growing, and with each new ally, the possibility of meaningful change seemed closer. But with growth came risks. A few days later, as Ethan and Jasmine worked the breakfast shift, a guest complained about a leaking pipe in one of the bathrooms. Ethan offered to check on it, enlisting Peter's help to address the issue before it could escalate. They found the pipe in question, a corroded mess that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. Peter muttered a curse under his breath as he inspected the damage. "This should have been replaced ages ago," he said. Ethan nodded grimly. "Let's do what we can." They worked quickly, patching the leak with a temporary fix. But as they stepped back into the hallway, they found themselves face to face with Dominic. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Dominic demanded, his voice echoing off the walls. Peter froze, but Ethan stepped forward. "Fixing a leak. A guest complained." "That's maintenance's job," Dominic snapped. "Not yours." "With all due respect, sir, it needed to be done," Ethan said evenly. Dominic's expression darkened. "If I catch you stepping out of line again, Delgado, you'll be out of here faster than you can blink. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir," Ethan said through gritted teeth. As Dominic stormed off, Peter let out a shaky breath. "You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that." Ethan managed a weak smile, but the weight of Dominic's threat hung heavy over him. He knew they couldn't keep this up forever, not without drawing more attention. That night, as he lay in bed, Ethan's thoughts churned. The small victories they'd achieved felt significant, but they were a drop in the ocean compared to the systemic issues plaguing the hotel. For the first time since starting his undercover mission, doubt crept in. Was it enough? Could they really make a difference? But as he recalled Jasmine's determined smile and Lucas's eager willingness to help, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, their quiet rebellion could grow into something bigger, something that could truly change the Imperial Lux for the better. The day began with an eerie stillness in the air, as if the Imperial Lux itself was holding its breath. Ethan had felt the tension building for weeks, small acts of defiance rippling through the staff, Dominic's increasing vigilance, and the mounting pressure to maintain appearances for the hotel's affluent guests. But today was different. Something was about to break, and Ethan could feel it. He arrived at the staff locker room earlier than usual, hoping to avoid Dominic's scathing remarks and give himself time to prepare mentally for the day ahead. As he opened his locker, Jasmine appeared beside him, her expression unusually grim. "We've got a problem," she said in a low voice. Ethan turned to her, immediately alert. "What happened?" "Lucas," she began, glancing around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. "He tried to fix the espresso machine in the cafe after it broke down yesterday. Dominic caught him and threatened to fire him on the spot." Ethan frowned deeply. "Did he?" "No," Jasmine said, shaking her head. "But he put Lucas on double shifts for the next week as punishment. The kid's barely keeping up as it is." Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. Dominic's heavy-handed tactics were pushing the staff to their limits, and Lucas was just another casualty in his quest for control. "We need to stand up for him," Ethan said firmly. "And how do you suggest we do that?" Jasmine asked, her tone tinged with skepticism. Ethan hesitated. He didn't have an answer yet, but he knew they couldn't let Dominic's actions go unchecked. The morning passed in a blur of frantic activity. Ethan and Jasmine worked side by side in the dining room, their movements synchronized as they served demanding guests and dealt with minor mishaps. But beneath the surface, Ethan's mind raced, formulating a plan. By the time lunch service ended, he had the beginnings of an idea. Gathering Jasmine, Peter, and a few other trusted colleagues in a quiet corner of the staff cafeteria, he laid out his thoughts. "We can't let Dominic keep doing this," Ethan began, his voice steady but urgent. "He's targeting Lucas now, but it could be any one of us next. We need to show him that we're not going to stand for it." Peter crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "And how do you propose we do that? The man's got the power to fire us all with a snap of his fingers." Ethan nodded, That's true. But he can't fire all of us at once, not without raising questions from upper management. If we stand together, we have a chance. And what exactly are we standing for? Jasmine asked, her voice tinged with cautious hope. For fair treatment, Ethan said. For the chance to do our jobs without fear of being punished for stepping up or speaking out. For Lucas and everyone else who's been pushed to their breaking point by Dominic's tactics. There was a moment of silence as the group absorbed his words. Then slowly, Peter nodded. All right, I'm in. Jasmine smiled faintly. Me too. One by one, the others voiced their agreement, their resolve growing stronger with each passing moment. That evening, Ethan put the plan into motion. He and Jasmine quietly spread the word among the staff, rallying support for their cause. By the end of the night, nearly everyone in the hotel's lower ranks was on board. The next day began like any other, with the staff scrambling to prepare for the morning rush. But as Dominic made his rounds, barking orders and issuing complaints, he began to notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The staff moved with a quiet confidence, their usual air of apprehension replaced by something more resolute. They exchanged knowing glances as they passed each other in the hallways, their unspoken solidarity growing stronger with each interaction. By mid-afternoon, Dominic's frustration was palpable. He cornered Ethan in the service hallway, his expression a mix of suspicion and fury. "What's going on?" Dominic demanded, his voice low and menacing. Ethan met his gaze evenly. "I don't know what you mean, sir." "Don't play dumb with me," Dominic snapped. "The staff's been acting strange all day. I know you have something to do with it." Ethan held his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. "We're just doing our job, sir. Isn't that what you want?" Dominic's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, a commotion erupted in the lobby. Ethan and Dominic rushed to the scene to find Lucas standing at the front desk, his face pale but determined. A guest was yelling at him, waving a finger in his face and demanding to see the manager. "I'm sorry, sir," Lucas said, his voice trembling but steady. "I'll do my best to resolve this for you." "That's not good enough," the guest shouted. "Get me someone who knows what they're doing." Dominic stepped forward, his expression cold and calculated. "What seems to be the problem here?" "This boy doesn't belong here," the guest spat. "He's incompetent." Dominic turned to Lucas, his eyes flashing with barely concealed anger. "I warned you about this," he said quietly. "You're done." "No, he's not," Ethan said, stepping between them. Dominic's head snapped toward him, his expression incredulous. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Ethan said firmly. "Lucas isn't the problem here. He's doing his best with what little support he's been given. Support that should come from you." The lobby fell silent as staff and guests alike turned to watch the confrontation. Ethan could feel their eyes on him, their collective tension hanging in the air. Dominic's face turned red with anger. "Who do you think you are to talk to me like that?" Ethan took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "Someone who cares about this hotel and the people who make it run." Dominic's lips curled into a sneer. "You're fired." "No, he's not," a voice said from the crowd. Jasmine stepped forward, her expression defiant. "None of us are." One by one, other staff members began to step forward, their presence a silent but powerful show of support. Dominic looked around, his anger giving way to uncertainty. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," Ethan said, his voice steady and clear, "is the breaking point. We're done being treated like we don't matter. We're done being afraid. If you want this hotel to succeed, you need us. All of us." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of the guests storming out in frustration. Dominic looked around at the staff, his authority slipping away with each passing second. For the first time, Ethan saw something other than anger in his eyes, fear. The tension from the lobby confrontation still lingered in the air the following morning. Ethan could feel it as he walked through the service corridors, his mind replaying Dominic's furious expression. While their act of solidarity had sent a powerful message, it had also escalated the stakes. Ethan's goal had never been to create open rebellion. It was to foster change. But Dominic's iron grip on the hotel was slipping, and that made him more dangerous than ever. Ethan was stationed at the pool area that afternoon. helping Jasmine and Peter organize towels and lounge chairs for the incoming wave of guests. The sun was high, casting shimmering reflections across the water. Children splashed in the shallow end while their parents lounged nearby, sipping cocktails and chatting under umbrellas. "It's peaceful now," Jasmine said as she folded a towel. "But wait until the lunch orders start rolling in. It'll be chaos." Ethan smiled faintly, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. His instincts proved correct. A sharp scream cut through the air, freezing everyone in place. Ethan turned toward the sound and saw a small boy flailing in the deep end of the pool. His tiny arm splashed wildly as he struggled to keep his head above water. Without thinking, Ethan dropped the stack of towels in his arms and sprinted toward the pool. "Call for help!" he shouted over his shoulder. He dove into the water, the cool shock hitting him as he swam toward the boy. The child was sinking fast, his movements growing weaker by the second. Ethan reached him just in time, wrapping his arms around the boy and pulling him to the surface. "Hold on," Ethan gasped, kicking his legs to keep them afloat. By the time he reached the edge of the pool, Peter and Jasmine were there to help pull the boy out. Jasmine immediately began administering CPR, her training kicking in as a small crowd gathered around them. "Come on, kid," Jasmine muttered under her breath, pressing down on the boy's chest. "Breathe." Ethan knelt beside her, water streaming off his uniform as he watched anxiously. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Jasmine worked, her hands steady despite the rising tension. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the boy coughed and sputtered, water spilling from his mouth. A wave of relief washed over the crowd, and the boy's mother pushed her way through, dropping to her knees beside him. "Oh my God, thank you," she cried, clutching her son to her chest. Jasmine sat back, letting out a shaky breath. "He's okay," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Ethan helped the boy's mother steady him as she cradled him in her arms. "We need to get him checked out," he said gently, "just to be safe." The mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course, thank you so much." As the boy was taken inside to be looked at by the hotel's on-call medic, the crowd began to disperse. Ethan glanced at Jasmine, who was wringing out the hem of her shirt. "You did great," he said quietly. Jasmine looked up at him, her eyes tired but grateful. "So did you. That kid's lucky you were here." Their brief moment of calm was interrupted by the arrival of Dominic. His face was flushed and his stride was brisk as he approached. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Ethan straightened, meeting Dominic's gaze evenly. "A boy nearly drowned in the pool. We got him out in time, but the equipment here is unacceptable." Dominic cut him off, his tone sharp. "You shouldn't have intervened. Liability issues. What if something had gone wrong?" "Something did go wrong," Jasmine interjected, her voice rising. "The lifeguard stand straps are still loose and the life ring wasn't even in the right spot. We've been trying to tell you for weeks that this equipment needs to be replaced." Dominic's jaw tightened and he turned his glare on her. "That's not your call to make, Reed. I'll handle this situation." "Will you?" Ethan asked, his tone calm but pointed. "Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't look like you've handled much of anything." Dominic's eyes blazed with fury, and for a moment Ethan thought he might explode. But instead, Dominic took a deep breath and forced a smile. "You're overstepping, Delgado," he said coldly. "Stick to your job and leave the management decisions to me." He turned on his heel and stalked off, leaving Ethan and Jasmine standing in the aftermath of his reprimand. "That man," Jasmine began, shaking her head. "I know," Ethan said, "but this incident might be what we need to get through to him, or someone higher up." By the end of the day, the story of the pool rescue had spread throughout the hotel. Guests praised the staff for their quick response, while employees whispered about Dominic's handling of the situation. Later that evening, as Ethan sat in the employee quarters, he reviewed everything that had happened. The pool equipment, the boys near drowning, Dominic's deflection. It all pointed to a larger issue. The hotel wasn't just neglecting its staff, it was neglecting its guests' safety as well. He pulled out a notebook and began jotting down details, determined to compile a comprehensive account of the hotel's failures. If Dominic wouldn't act, then Ethan would. As the moonlight filtered through the small window, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for the staff anymore. He was fighting for everyone who walked through the Imperial Lux's doors. Ethan stood in the staff locker room, his notebook tucked securely under his arm. After the near tragedy at the pool, his resolve had hardened. The incident had been a wake-up call, not just for him but for everyone who worked at the Imperial Lux. The hotel was failing its employees and guests, and Dominic's unchecked authority was at the heart of the problem. But Ethan knew he couldn't bring about change on his own. He needed allies, people who cared as much about the hotel as he did, and were willing to risk everything to make it better. His first stop was the dining room, where Jasmine was resetting tables after the breakfast rush. She looked up as he approached, her tired expression softening into a faint smile. "You've got that look again," she said. "What's on your mind?" "We need to talk," Ethan replied. Jasmine's smile faded and she set down the silverware. "About what?" "About what happened at the pool," Ethan said, his voice low. "And about what needs to happen next." They found a quiet corner in the employee cafeteria, where Peter joined them a few minutes later. Ethan opened his notebook, showing them the list he'd compiled: safety hazards, Dominic's mismanagement, and the staff's growing frustration. "This is everything I've documented so far," Ethan explained. "It's not enough to make management listen, but it's a start. What we need is a united front, something they can't ignore." Peter leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "And how do you plan to do that? Most of the staff are too scared to even look Dominic in the eye." "I know," Ethan admitted. "That's why we need to start small. If we can get a core group of people to back us, others will follow." Jasmine nodded slowly. "Okay, who are we thinking?" "Lucas, for one," Ethan said. "He's young, but he's got heart, and after what Dominic did to him, he's ready to fight back." Peter snorted. "That kid's got more guts than half the people here. All right, who else?" "Lucy from reception," Ethan continued. "She's been here long enough to know how the system works and how it doesn't." "And Javier," Jasmine suggested, referring to the housekeeping supervisor. Ethan hesitated. Javier was a wild card. He was well liked among the staff, but his position made him cautious about rocking the boat. "We can try," Ethan said finally, "but we'll need to approach him carefully." Over the next few days, Ethan, Jasmine, and Peter began reaching out to potential allies. They started with Lucas, who eagerly agreed to join their cause. "Anything to stick it to Dominic," he said with a grin. Lucy was more hesitant. "I don't know," she said when they approached her during her break. "I've got bills to pay. If this backfires—" "It won't," Jasmine assured her. "We're not asking you to take on Dominic alone. This is about all of us standing together." Lucy sighed, her fingers drumming on the edge of her coffee cup. "All right," she said finally. "But if this goes south, I'm blaming you." Ethan smiled. "Fair enough." Javier proved to be the toughest challenge. When they cornered him in the housekeeping office, his initial reaction was one of exasperation. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you're asking for?" he demanded, his voice low but fierce. "Yes," Ethan replied calmly. "But we also know that things can't go on like this. You've seen it, Javier. The equipment failures, the staff burnout, Dominic's power plays. This hotel is falling apart." Javier rubbed a hand over his face, his expression torn. "You're right," he admitted. "But if Dominic finds out I'm involved—" "He won't," Jasmine interjected. "At least not until it's too late for him to stop us." Javier sighed heavily. "All right, I'll help. But if this blows up, you're on your own." With Javier on board, the group began holding secret meetings in the staff quarters after hours. They brainstormed ways to address the hotel's most pressing issues and compiled evidence to present to upper management. One night, Lucas brought up an idea that made everyone pause. "What if we got the guests involved?" he suggested. Peter raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure?" "Well," Lucas continued, "the guests are the hotel's bread and butter, right? If they start complaining about the same things we are, safety, service, staff treatment, management won't be able to ignore it." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "That's risky," he said, "but it could work, if we handle it carefully." Over the next week, the group quietly began reaching out to guests who had experienced issues during their stay. They encouraged them to leave honest reviews and feedback, highlighting the problems they'd encountered. At the same time, Ethan and Jasmine worked to bolster morale among the staff. They organized small impromptu gatherings during breaks, where employees could vent their frustrations and share ideas. Slowly but surely, the sense of unity among the staff began to grow. But Dominic wasn't blind to the changes happening around him. He watched the staff with a growing sense of unease, his suspicion falling squarely on Ethan. One afternoon, Dominic called Ethan into his office. The room was stark and cold, the blinds drawn to block out the sunlight. Dominic sat behind his desk, his hands folded neatly in front of him. "You've been busy," Dominic said, his tone casual but laced with menace. "Just doing my job, sir," Ethan replied evenly. Dominic's lips curved into a thin smile. "Is that so? Because it seems to me like you're trying to stir up trouble." "I wouldn't call it trouble," Ethan said, meeting Dominic's gaze. "I'd call it trying to make things better." Dominic's smile vanished, replaced by a scowl. "Let me make one thing clear, Delgado. This is my hotel and I run it the way I see fit. If you don't like it, there's the door." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "With all due respect, sir, this hotel belongs to its people, the guests and the staff. Without them, it's nothing." Dominic's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, the phone on his desk rang. He snatched it up, barking a curt, "What?" into the receiver. As Dominic's attention shifted to the call, Ethan stood and left the office. His heart was pounding, but his resolve was unshaken. The alliance they were building was gaining momentum, and no amount of intimidation would stop him now. The days following Ethan's tense meeting with Dominic were a blur of careful planning and mounting pressure. The alliance of staff members had grown stronger, their secret meetings more frequent, their goals more ambitious. The frustration and hope that bound them together fueled their determination to stand against the oppressive management. But Ethan knew the clock was ticking. Dominic's watchful eyes lingered on him longer each day, and Ethan could sense the general manager's growing suspicion. The man was circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. One evening, Ethan sat in the employee cafeteria with Jasmine, Peter, and Lucy. The low hum of conversation around them was a comforting backdrop as they discussed the next steps for their movement. "We're making progress," Jasmine said, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. "But it still feels like we're one step away from disaster." "Dominic's not an idiot," Peter added. "He knows something's going on. It's only a matter of time before he figures it out." Ethan nodded, his expression grim. "That's why we need to act quickly. If we can present our case to upper management before Dominic shuts us down, we might have a chance." Lucy leaned forward, her voice low. "And if we don't?" Ethan didn't answer, but the weight of her question hung heavily over the group. The following morning, the tension in the air was palpable. Dominic had called a mandatory staff meeting in the main ballroom, a rare and unsettling event. Employees whispered nervously as they filed into the ornate room, their unease mirrored in their hesitant movements. Ethan took a seat near the back, his heart pounding as he scanned the room. Dominic stood at the front, his expression cold and calculating as he waited for the last stragglers to arrive. Once everyone was seated, Dominic stepped forward, his voice cutting through the hushed murmurs. "I've called this meeting because it's come to my attention that certain individuals have been engaging in unauthorized activities that undermine the operations of this hotel." A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Ethan exchanged a glance with Jasmine, who sat a few rows ahead. Her face was calm, but he could see the tension in her posture. Dominic continued, his tone growing sharper. "Let me be clear. This behavior will not be tolerated. Anyone found participating in these activities will face immediate consequences." The room was silent, the weight of Dominic's words pressing down on the staff. But before he could say more, a voice cut through the tension. "Maybe if you listened to us, there wouldn't be any unauthorized activities." All heads turned toward Lucas, who stood defiantly near the front of the room. His voice trembled slightly, but his determination was evident. Dominic's eyes narrowed, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Lucas said, his voice steadier now. "We've been trying to make this hotel better, for the guests and for ourselves. But you don't care about that, do you?" The room erupted into murmurs and Dominic's face darkened. "Enough," he barked. "If you think you can challenge me, you're the one who's been challenged, Dominic." The new voice was calm but commanding, cutting through the chaos with startling clarity. Ethan froze as all eyes turned toward him. He hadn't meant to speak, but the words had slipped out before he could stop them. Dominic's gaze snapped to Ethan, his expression shifting from anger to suspicion. "You," he said slowly, his voice dripping with venom. "I knew there was something off about you." Ethan stood, his heart pounding but his resolve firm. "What's off?" he said evenly. "Is the way this hotel is being run. The staff is overworked, the guests are unhappy, and the only thing you care about is maintaining control." The room was silent, the staff watching with a mixture of fear and awe. Dominic's lips curled into a sneer. "And who exactly do you think you are to lecture me?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. The time for secrets was over. "My name is Ethan Monroe," he said, his voice steady. "I'm the owner of this hotel." The gasps that followed were deafening. Employees exchanged stunned looks, and even Dominic seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "You're lying," Dominic said finally, his voice trembling with disbelief. "This is some kind of trick." "It's not a trick," Ethan said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his identification, holding it up for all to see. "I came here undercover to see what was really happening at the Imperial Lux, and now I understand." Dominic's face turned red with fury. "You think you can waltz in here, play dress-up and judge me? I've kept this hotel running. At what cost?" Ethan interrupted, his voice rising. "You've created a culture of fear and mistrust. The staff is exhausted, the equipment is failing, and the guests are noticing. This hotel used to stand for excellence, but under your management it's become a shadow of what it once was." The room was silent again, the weight of Ethan's words sinking in. Dominic's sneer returned, but it was weaker now. "If you think you can fix this mess, be my guest, but don't expect me to help." "I don't need your help," Ethan said firmly. "I need the help of the people who actually make this hotel what it is, the staff." He turned to face the employees, his voice softening. "I've seen how hard you work, how much you care about this place. You deserve better, better equipment, better support, and better leadership. And that's what I'm here to give you." The room erupted into applause, the staff's enthusiasm and relief palpable. Dominic glared at Ethan, his jaw clenched. "You've made a mistake, Monroe. This isn't over." "No," Ethan said, meeting his gaze. The ballroom was still buzzing with whispers as the meeting came to an abrupt end. Staff members dispersed slowly, glancing back at Ethan as though trying to reconcile the quiet, unassuming waiter they thought they knew with the man who had just declared himself the owner of the Imperial Lux. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, his chest tight and his thoughts racing. Jasmine approached him cautiously, her face a mixture of surprise and concern. "So, you're the owner," she said, her voice low. Ethan turned to her, his expression weary but determined. "Yes, and I owe you all an explanation. I didn't come here to deceive anyone. I came because I needed to see the truth." "Well, you've definitely stirred things up," Jasmine replied, crossing her arms. "But what happens now? Dominic's not just going to roll over and let you take charge." "I know," Ethan said, his gaze hardening. "But this is my hotel, and it's time to take back control. Not just for the guests, but for everyone who works here." The next morning, Ethan called an emergency meeting with the department heads. It was a small group: Dominic, Sophia from HR, and Javier from housekeeping. Ethan had chosen to keep the meeting intimate, knowing that trust among the staff would take time to rebuild. As they gathered in the executive conference room, the tension was palpable. Dominic sat at the far end of the table, his expression a mask of barely concealed disdain. Sophia looked wary but curious, while Javier's guarded demeanor hinted at cautious optimism. "Thank you for coming," Ethan began, his tone calm but firm. "I know yesterday's events were unexpected, but I need you all to understand that my goal hasn't changed. I want to see this hotel thrive. To do that, we need to make some significant changes." Dominic scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "And what exactly do you think needs to change? From where I'm sitting, things were just fine until you started meddling." "They weren't fine," Ethan said sharply, his patience wearing thin. "The The staff is overworked, the facilities are outdated, and the culture here is toxic. If we don't address these issues, the Imperial Lux will lose everything that makes it special. Sophia cleared her throat, her voice hesitant. What kind of changes are you proposing, Mr. Monroe? First, we're going to prioritize safety and well-being, Ethan replied. That means replacing faulty equipment, like the pool gear that nearly caused a tragedy, and ensuring that staff have the resources they need to do their jobs effectively. And who's going to pay for all this? Dominic snapped. You think money grows on trees? It's called investment, Dominic, Ethan retorted. If we take care of our people, they'll take care of our guests, and the profits will follow. Javier nodded slowly. It's true. Happy staff means happy guests. I've seen it happen before at smaller hotels. Ethan smiled at Javier, grateful for the support. Exactly. But it's not just about resources, it's about culture. We need to foster an environment where employees feel valued, heard, and empowered to contribute. Sophia looked thoughtful. We could start by implementing regular feedback sessions with staff. Give them a platform to share their ideas and concerns without fear of retaliation. That's a good start, Ethan agreed. We'll also establish training programs to help employees grow in their roles. And if they want to pursue new opportunities within the hotel, we'll support that too. Dominic's expression darkened further. You're making promises you can't keep, Monroe. These people don't want training programs, they want paychecks. They deserve both, Ethan shot back. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here. Ethan knew that winning over the department heads was only part of the battle. To truly enact change, he needed the full support of the staff. Over the next few days, he held a series of town hall-style meetings in the employee cafeteria, inviting everyone, from housekeeping to reception, to share their thoughts. At first, the meetings were met with skepticism. Staff members trickled in hesitantly, their expressions wary. But as Ethan spoke openly about his intentions and listened intently to their concerns, the atmosphere began to shift. Lucas was one of the first to speak up. We've been saying this for years, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. But no one ever listened. Why should we believe you're any different? Because I'm not here to make empty promises, Ethan replied. I'm here to take action, and I need your help to do it. Jasmine chimed in, her voice steady. He's right. We've already started making small changes on our own, and it's working. Imagine what we could do if we had real support. One by one, other employees began to speak, their voices growing stronger with each contribution. They shared ideas for improving communication, streamlining processes, and enhancing the guest experience. Ethan took notes on everything, his determination growing with each passing moment. By the end of the week, the staff's initial hesitance had transformed into cautious optimism. The alliance was no longer a secret. It was a movement, and its momentum was undeniable. But not everyone was on board. Dominic's resistance had only intensified, and he made no secret of his disdain for Ethan's leadership. Behind closed doors, he began plotting his next move. Late one night, Ethan received an urgent message from Lucas. Meet me in the kitchen, it read. When Ethan arrived, Lucas was pacing nervously, his hands clenched into fists. What's going on? Ethan asked, his voice tinged with concern. It's Dominic, Lucas said, his words tumbling out in a rush. He's trying to sabotage you. I overheard him on the phone talking about reporting you to the board for misconduct. Ethan's jaw tightened. Did he say what kind of misconduct? Lucas nodded. He's claiming you've been misusing hotel funds for these changes you're making. He even mentioned something about forging documents. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Thank you for telling me. I'll handle it. The next morning, Ethan called a meeting with the board of directors. He presented his vision for the hotel, backed by detailed reports on the progress they'd made and the positive feedback from both staff and guests. Dominic, true to form, stormed into the meeting with his accusations, but Ethan was ready. He calmly refuted each claim, presenting evidence to disprove Dominic's lies. When the dust settled, the board was unanimous in their decision. Dominic was removed from his position, and Ethan was given full authority to implement his reforms. As Dominic packed his belongings and left the hotel for the last time, the staff gathered in the lobby to watch him go. The tension that had hung over the Imperial Lux for so long finally began to lift, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. Ethan stood in the center of the room, surrounded by his team. "This isn't just my victory," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's ours, and this is only the beginning." The ballroom glittered with opulence, a stark contrast to the humble origins of the hotel Ethan had inherited. Chandeliers bathed the room in a soft golden glow, casting shadows on the polished floors, and the sound of classical music drifted through the air, mingling with the clink of champagne glasses. It was the night of the hotel's gala, an event meant to mark a new era for the Imperial Lux. Ethan had hoped it would be a night to celebrate, a testament to everything they had fought for. But he was quickly realizing that nothing ever went as planned. Ethan stood near the entrance, his gaze sweeping across the room as the guests mingled. The staff, dressed in their finest, moved with quiet precision, attending to the guests' every need. The improvements they had implemented were evident. Guest complaints had dropped, the staff seemed rejuvenated, and the atmosphere was filled with an energy that had been sorely lacking for years. This was their moment to shine. Jasmine, still wearing the uniform she had started with, approached Ethan with a strained smile. "Everything's going according to plan. The guests are happy, the food is on time, and the decor looks beautiful," she said, her voice tinged with a mix of pride and exhaustion. "That's great to hear," Ethan replied, offering her a reassuring smile. "But we're not out of the woods yet. Keep an eye on things. I don't want any surprises tonight." Jasmine gave him a quick nod before slipping into the crowd to continue her duties. As the night progressed, everything appeared to be unfolding perfectly. The guests were enjoying themselves. Laughter echoed through the room, and Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of pride. Maybe, just maybe, they were on the brink of something truly transformative. But as the evening wore on, a shadow began to creep over the gala. It started with a sudden commotion at the bar. A loud, enraged voice cut through the music, followed by the unmistakable sound of a glass shattering against the floor. Ethan turned, his eyes narrowing. "Get me the manager, now!" The voice belonged to a well-dressed man, his face flushed with anger, standing at the center of the bar area, a crowd of guests gathering around. The bartender looked helpless, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Ethan's heart sank. This was not the night he had envisioned. He quickly made his way over to the scene, his stomach knotting. The man, a guest, was gesturing wildly, pointing accusingly at the bartender. "What's the problem?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but firm. This is unacceptable," the guest roared, his eyes wide with fury. "I've been waiting over an hour for my drink and you treat me like a second-class citizen. I demand compensation for this inconvenience." Ethan's eyes flicked to the bartender, who was visibly shaken. "I'm so sorry, sir," the bartender said, his voice trembling. "It's just that we've been a bit backed up." "I don't care," the guest interrupted, his voice rising. "I'm paying for the best service money can buy, and this is the treatment I get?" Ethan held up a hand to silence the man. "Let's take a step back. I'm the owner of this hotel. Please, let's talk calmly." The guest's eyes widened at Ethan's words, but the anger didn't subside. "You? The owner? You've got a lot of nerve showing up here." Ethan's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I understand you're upset. Let's find a way to fix this." Before the situation could escalate further, Jasmine appeared at Ethan's side, her face a mix of concern and determination. "Ethan, there's something wrong with the kitchen. They've run out of a few key ingredients for the main course," she said quietly but with urgency in her tone. "The head chef is freaking out, and there's a line of guests waiting for their food." Ethan's mind raced as he processed the news. They couldn't afford any more setbacks. The kitchen was the heart of the evening service, and if they didn't fix this quickly, it could ruin everything. "I'll handle it," Ethan said to Jasmine, then turned back to the irate guest. "Sir, I understand your frustration. Please allow me a moment to resolve this issue. I'll personally ensure you're taken care of." The man glared at him, but his attention was now partially diverted. "You better," he muttered, turning away. Ethan took a deep breath and motioned for Jasmine to follow him. They rushed toward the kitchen, weaving through the crowded ballroom. The tension in the air was thick, but Ethan pushed it down, focusing on the immediate crisis. Inside the kitchen, chaos reigned. Pots clanged, staff members hurried around, and the head chef, Chef Marcos, stood in the center, furiously flipping through a stack of order tickets. "Marcos, what's going on?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice steady despite the whirlwind around him. "The lamb is overcooked," Marcos said through gritted teeth. "We're out of the risotto ingredients, and the guests are demanding their food." "I don't know what to do, Ethan." "Okay, calm down," Ethan said. "Let's think. How much lamb do we have left?" Chef Marcos glanced at the counter. "About 3 servings. The rest is ruined. And the risotto? Gone. Completely gone." Ethan's mind raced as he thought through their options. They couldn't simply let the guests go without dinner. They would never come back, and the reputation of the hotel would be shot. Then it hit him. "Marcos," Ethan said with sudden clarity, "we've got the roast chicken in the back. If we change the menu and offer that as an alternative with a new side, we might be able to salvage the situation." Marcos's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "You want me to change the menu mid-service?" "Yes," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We'll make it work. I'll have Jasmine handle the guests while you rework the dishes. We can make this work." Chef Marcos hesitated for a moment, but then he nodded. "All right, we'll do it your way." Ethan quickly turned to Jasmine, who was already heading in their direction, looking tense. "Tell the guests that the menu has been changed," he instructed her, "and offer the roast chicken as a substitute. Make sure they know we're doing everything we can to fix the issue." As Jasmine nodded and disappeared into the crowd, Ethan returned to the ballroom, his heart pounding. He could feel the eyes of the guests on him, their expectations heavy in the air. He made his way to the irate guest at the bar, who was still fuming but had calmed slightly. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, sir," Ethan said with a practiced calm. "I've spoken to the chef and we've reworked the menu to ensure everything is taken care of. The roast chicken will be served in place of the lamb, and we've made sure the sides are prepared fresh." The man eyed him suspiciously, but after a long pause, he nodded curtly. "Fine, I'll take the chicken, but this better be worth it." Ethan offered him a tight smile. "Thank you for your patience, sir. We'll ensure you have a great experience." As Ethan turned to leave, he breathed a sigh of relief. The situation hadn't been easy, but it was under control, for now. The gala continued, albeit with a slight shift in energy. The guests who had been upset were pacified, and the staff worked tirelessly to deliver the reworked meals. Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he watched the night unfold. They had averted disaster, but it was clear that the road to reform was far from over. The soft hum of the elevator echoed in Ethan's ears as it ascended toward the top floor of the Imperial Lux. He had spent the last few hours at the back of the hotel, speaking with the employees who had been instrumental in the early stages of their transformation. They were feeling the weight of the changes, the uncertainty that accompanied such a monumental shift. But today was a turning point. He had walked through the halls of the hotel earlier, observing how the staff moved with a new sense of purpose. Some still uncertain, others proud. It was a tangible change, something even the most skeptical guests could feel. The people were the heart of the hotel now, not just the luxury or the grandeur. But even as things improved, Ethan knew there was more to be done. Jasmine met him at the top floor with a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ethan," she said quietly, glancing toward the conference room door. "The meeting's about to start. Everyone's here." He nodded, steeling himself. "We're finally making this work, Jasmine, but it's just the beginning." The room was filled with key management figures: Jasmine, Lucas, Marcus, and a handful of others who had supported Ethan's vision. But one chair was conspicuously empty, the one where Rodriguez should have sat. Ethan had given him the option to join today's meeting, to speak up, share his thoughts, to see if he could help. But as expected, Rodriguez had refused. He was a man who clung to power in a way that stifled innovation and change. He could not see what was right in front of him: the need for a shift in leadership, the need for a new foundation to be built from the ground up. Ethan cleared his throat as he stepped to the front of the room, looking around at his team, his family now. "Thank you all for being here. Today is crucial. We're going to rebuild the foundation of the Imperial Lux together. It's not going to be easy, but I believe in all of you." The room went silent as they listened. some unsure, others leaning in with anticipation. Over the past few months, we've watched the hotel evolve, he continued. We've made strides in improving employee morale, we've implemented better systems, and we've started to get results. But now it's time to go deeper. We're not just fixing what's broken, we're creating something new. We need to focus on sustainable growth, listen to every voice here, and make sure that every team member knows their value. We're not going to stop here. Ethan paused, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the real challenge, sustaining this progress and building a culture that would outlast any leadership change. I know there's resistance. I've seen it, he said, his voice firm. I've seen employees who fear for their jobs, who fear speaking up. We can't move forward unless we change that. We can't build a foundation if fear is still holding us back. We need to make sure this hotel isn't just about guests. It's about the people who make it run. Jasmine stood up, her eyes meeting Ethan's with a deep, unwavering trust. You're right. There's been a shift. I see it every day. People are starting to feel heard, but we need to create clear channels of communication. We need feedback from everyone, not just the management. I agree, said Lucas, a young supervisor who had joined early in the process. But we also need structure, clear roles, a system to prevent the chaos we saw when things started changing too quickly. Ethan nodded. The truth was, this was the hard part, implementing change without losing sight of their ultimate goal. He could feel the tension in the room, but he knew that the people sitting here had the passion and the drive to push through it. They had to believe that they could make this hotel a place of pride again. Let's break it down, he said. We need new leadership systems. We need clear objectives for every department. And we need to bring in the staff, everyone, not just management, to make sure they understand the value of what we're trying to achieve here. Jasmine stepped up beside him, pulling up a chart on the projector screen. We'll start by restructuring the feedback system, a more formal approach. Everyone from the bellhops to the chefs should have a voice in shaping the future of this hotel. It'll create a more transparent environment. And we can improve efficiency by cross-training teams, added Marcus, the head of housekeeping. We've seen how much communication breaks down when departments don't understand each other's challenges. Cross-training could be a huge asset for us. Ethan smiled at the enthusiasm, feeling a flicker of hope. This was what he had envisioned all along. The team was finally getting it. They were building the hotel's future, together. But then the door opened, and to Ethan's surprise, it was not just Jasmine who stepped in. It was Rodriguez. His face was a mixture of anger and confusion. I have a few things to say, Rodriguez muttered, his voice low. Ethan stood tall. Rodriguez, we've made a lot of progress here. We've seen results, but we can't continue to work like we did in the past. We need change, and we need it now. Rodriguez gripped the edge of the table. This isn't what I signed up for, Monroe. You think you can come in and... I think, Ethan interrupted, his voice firm but calm, that we can build something better. I think you're standing in the way of progress. You've had your chance, Rodriguez. This hotel needs new leadership. I'm offering you a choice. You can join us or you can leave. The silence in the room was deafening. Ethan's words hung in the air, and he felt the collective breath of the room being held. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed, his lips tightening as he looked from Ethan to the others. He was a man who couldn't accept the truth, the undeniable fact that his time was over, but Ethan knew this moment was inevitable. If you can't get behind this, Ethan continued, you're holding us all back. We need leadership that supports these changes. We need all hands on deck. Rodriguez glared at him one last time before storming out of the room. The tension in the air lifted, but there was no denying the weight of the decision that had just been made. The room was now Ethan's. After a long moment of silence, Jasmine spoke. Well, that was something. Ethan let out a breath, a small smile forming on his face. The hardest part is over. We can't let fear keep us from moving forward. Let's keep working. And with that, the meeting continued. The changes were no longer just an idea. They were a plan that would reshape the Imperial Lux from the ground up. As the meeting came to a close, Ethan felt a sense of resolve that he hadn't felt in weeks. They were on the right path. They were building a foundation that would last, not just for the hotel but for everyone involved. a foundation of trust, of respect, of a shared vision for the future. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with this team by his side, Ethan knew they were ready for whatever came next. The evening sky outside was a deep indigo, flecked with stars. The grand ballroom of the Imperial Lux was bathed in soft golden light, reflecting off chandeliers that hung like massive jewels from the ceiling. The tables were draped in white linen, adorned with crystal glassware and gold accents, every surface gleaming under the meticulous care of the staff. It was a night meant to celebrate the transformation of the hotel, a moment to mark the beginning of a new era, an era that Ethan Monroe, the unexpected heir to the hotel, had so carefully crafted with the support of his loyal employees. The gala was packed with guests who had been personally invited to witness this renewal. There were industry moguls, local celebrities, loyal patrons who had seen the Imperial Lux at its peak, and staff members who had been part of the hotel's journey toward change. Ethan stood by the entrance, watching the guests mingle, exchanging pleasantries, their voices a soft hum of approval. He couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. But with every passing minute, the weight of responsibility pressed a little heavier on his shoulders. He had worked tirelessly with the team, pushing for improvements both large and small, fostering a new sense of purpose among the staff, and most importantly, giving them a voice that had been silenced for far too long. Tonight was their victory as much as his, and that knowledge kept him grounded amidst the opulence surrounding him. Ethan turned to Jasmine, who stood by his side, her eyes scanning the room. She had been his right hand throughout this journey, and seeing her here now, alongside him, made it all feel real. "You look great," Ethan said with a small smile. Jasmine was dressed in a sleek black gown, her hair pinned up elegantly. She had come a long way from the young waitress who had first approached him in the employee cafeteria. "You too," she said, returning the smile. Her eyes glinted with pride, and Ethan knew she shared his sense of accomplishment. "The guests seem happy. I think they're really starting to see the changes." Ethan nodded. "It's more than that. It's not just the decor or the food, though that's important too. It's the energy. People are finally starting to feel like they belong here, and it's thanks to you." He looked at her, his voice softening. "You've been with me every step of the way." Jasmine looked away for a moment, a touch of humility in her expression. "I'm just doing my part. We all are." As they stood there, taking in the atmosphere, the doors to the ballroom opened, and a small group of local press and socialites entered, signaling the official start of the evening. The buzz of excitement swelled in the room, and Ethan felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. This night wasn't just a celebration. It was the test of everything they had worked for. The public would determine if their efforts were truly paying off. The first part of the evening unfolded smoothly. Guests mingled, enjoying the lavish hors d'oeuvres and champagne, and Ethan, Jasmine, and the other staff members moved through the crowd, ensuring that everyone's needs were met. The Imperial Lux was alive with a new energy, and it wasn't just in the staff. The guests, too, felt the difference. There was a warmth in the air, a genuine hospitality that had been absent for so long. Ethan could see it in their faces. The skepticism was fading, replaced by curiosity and, in some cases, admiration. Around halfway through the evening, Ethan's gaze met that of Dominic, who stood off to the side, watching the festivities with a sour expression. The man's presence cast a shadow over the event, but Ethan refused to let it ruin the moment. Dominic had lost, and he knew it. The changes were in place, and Ethan had the support of the staff. But as the night wore on, things began to take a turn. A soft murmur of concern rippled through the guests as one of the staff members, a young waiter named Lucas, rushed toward Ethan. His face was pale, his breath shallow. "Ethan, there's a problem in the kitchen," Lucas said, his voice trembling. "The main course, it's..." Ethan's stomach dropped. He had worked so hard to ensure that tonight would go off without a hitch, but every great event had its bumps. "What happened?" "Some of the dishes. They weren't prepared properly," Lucas explained, his eyes darting nervously to the side. "The temperature's off on the fish, and the risotto. There's something wrong with the texture. It's not going to be ready in time." Ethan's heart pounded as he quickly processed the information. This was it. The moment everything could fall apart, but he couldn't let panic take over. "Where's the chef?" "Chef Marcos is in the back. He's trying to fix it, but the kitchen's a mess right now. People are starting to notice." Ethan took a deep breath. "All right, we'll fix this." He turned to Jasmine, who had overheard the conversation. She raised an eyebrow but gave a subtle nod, understanding the gravity of the situation. Ethan strode toward the back of the ballroom where the kitchen staff worked behind closed doors. The kitchen was chaos. Staff members rushed around trying to salvage what they could of the disorganized mess. Plates and dishes were half prepared, and the chefs were frantically checking timers and adjusting burners. He found Chef Marcos near the stove, his hands shaking as he stirred a pot. "What's going on, Marcos?" Ethan asked, his voice calm despite the tension rising inside him. "I don't know what happened, Ethan," Marcos replied, his face drawn with stress. "The fish is undercooked, and the risotto, it's like the recipe just didn't work tonight. The consistency is all wrong. The guests will notice. We can't serve this." Ethan took a deep breath, his mind working fast. He couldn't let this derail everything they had worked for. "Listen, we don't have time to start over. We'll fix this. Can we salvage the fish with a quick sear?" Marcos hesitated for a moment before nodding. "We can do that, but we need more time. We might be able to get the risotto right, but it'll take at least 20 minutes. "Then that's what we'll do," Ethan said firmly. "I'll go out there and buy us some time. Let's get it done." Ethan returned to the ballroom with purpose, his expression calm despite the urgency he felt inside. He motioned for Jasmine to meet him at the side. "I need you to help me with something," he said quickly. "The kitchen's running behind and we need to buy some time. Can you go to the guests and let them know there's been a slight delay? Just keep them distracted." Jasmine nodded. "Got it." As she moved off to speak with the guests, Ethan walked over to the band and signaled for them to keep the music playing at a steady, upbeat tempo. The goal was to keep the atmosphere lively and relaxed, even as behind the scenes they scrambled to make everything right. Minutes felt like hours as the kitchen staff worked tirelessly to finish the dishes. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty, but he knew that if they could pull this off, it would be a victory of its own. When the food was finally ready, Ethan joined Jasmine at the front of the ballroom. She smiled at him, her expression a mixture of relief and pride. "We did it," she said. Ethan gave her a small smile. "We're not done yet, but we're close." Together they moved toward the guests, ensuring that everyone's plates were delivered on time and to perfection. The gala was saved, not just by the food, but by the dedication of the staff, the teamwork that had grown between them, and the shared commitment to excellence. The evening wore on, and though there were still whispers of the near disaster, the mood had shifted. Guests were enjoying the evening, some even commenting on how exceptional the food tasted despite the initial delay. It wasn't just about the luxury of the setting anymore, it was about the people. The transformation of the Imperial Luxe had taken root, and it wasn't just in the decor or the food, it was in the hearts of the people who worked there. As the night came to a close, Ethan stood by the grand staircase watching the last of the guests leave. He was tired, but it was the kind of exhaustion that came with knowing they had accomplished something important. Jasmine joined him, her face alight with a smile. "We did it," she said, her voice full of pride. Ethan nodded, looking out over the empty ballroom. "Yeah, we did." As the final moments of the gala unfolded and the ballroom began to empty, one thing became clear. The real success of the night wasn't just in the lavish setting or the perfect food. It was in the transformation that had taken place behind the scenes. Ethan's journey showed us that true leadership isn't about holding power. It's about lifting others up, making tough decisions, and having the courage to make changes that benefit everyone, even when the path isn't easy. In the end, it wasn't the building or the brand that made the Imperial Luxe shine. It was the people, the staff who felt heard and valued, and the guests who were treated with respect and care. That's a lesson we can all take with us. In any community, whether it's a hotel, a workplace, or a family, the foundation of success lies in the strength of its relationships and the value placed on each individual. So as you reflect on Ethan's journey, think about the changes you can make in your own life and surroundings. Have you ever felt unheard or perhaps wished for a chance to make a real difference? How do you think we can all help create environments where everyone has a voice? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. What lessons did you take away from tonight's story? And if you enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to explore in the world of leadership, transformation, and the power of community. Stay tuned for more stories that inspire change and challenge us to do better. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you in the next chapter.